Heaven's Arena is where my opinions start to become blasphemous, because I do not like this arc very much. I don't hate it, and it's certainly not my least favorite in the series, we'll get there soon enough, but I always come away from it thinking that it could have been so much more. As I implied, this is very contrary to the popular opinion. Most Hunter x Hunter fans love this section, and more power to them, but I just don't see it. There are some great aspects to this arc though, I can't deny that. So let's get started so I can get to them quicker. What's the story here? With just over 6 months left until September 1st, Killua takes Gon to Heaven's Arena, a battle tower where people compete in televised matches for money and fame. As you win matches, you get to ascend the tower, with your fights becoming more and more difficult as you go. Killua's father actually made him compete here when he was 6 under the condition that he couldn't come home until he reached the 200th floor, which took him 2 whole years. A good parenting move. The two boys hope to kill 2 birds with 1 stone by acquiring money from the matches while also gaining enough skill for Gon to beat Hisoka in New York New City. The only problem with that plan is Hisoka himself, who frequents Heaven's Arena and is apparently too impatient to wait a whole extra arc to fight Gon. This arc serves 2 purposes in the grand scheme of things. The first is to introduce this world's magic system, and the second is to resolve Gon's rivalry with Hisoka. Basically, this is a training arc. The magic system in question is called Nen. The core concept of Nen is that all living things are constantly emitting life energy known as aura, and once awakened to be able to see it, they can learn to manipulate it for their own benefit. Sounds pretty simple and familiar, right? Like you've seen this before? How complicated could it be? It's not like it's rocket science. You're right, it's not rocket science. It's far more complicated than rocket science. Nen is a famously convoluted magic system, and trying to explain it all would take me several hours, so I'm only going to go over the pretty basic elements of it. Nen has 4 basic elements. The first is Ten, which is the practice of manifesting your aura and covering your body with it. Even just this first step makes a huge difference in a person's power level. In fact, the series frequently likens the difference in power between basic users of Nen and non-users to that of a baby versus a full-grown adult. The second is Zetsu, which is the practice of shutting off your aura flow. This can be used for stealth, to conserve energy, or for any other number of creative applications. The third is Ren, which is basically Ten, but instead of gently manifesting your aura, you explosively send it away from yourself. Think of the first 2 principles as being about control, while the third is about power. Finally, the fourth is Hatsu, otherwise known as the Release or Nen ability. Hatsu is very complicated, but in simple terms, it's the unique way that each user decides to use their aura. Part of what makes Nen so unique is that the system is crafted with creativity at its core. If you can think of an ability, it's probably possible to accomplish it with your aura. It has been said that restrictions are what create interest, though, and Nen certainly has those. Ten, Zetsu, and Ren are essentially universal across Nen users, but Hatsu abilities can be divided into 6 different categories, with each person being born with a natural affinity for one of them. These categories are Enhancers, who use aura to strengthen their physical blows, Transmuters, who convert aura into a different substance like lightning, Conjurers, who create objects or weapons out of thin air with aura, Manipulators, who control things or people, Emitters, who shoot their aura outwards from their bodies, and Specialists, they're just weird. Despite being born with one affinity, it's actually possible for a Nen user to use any category, although their effectiveness with each is determined by the Nen wheel. This diagram shows how closely each category is related to each other. Each step away from your native affinity will cause a loss of 20% effectiveness. To demonstrate, a natural emitter can use enhancement and manipulation at 80% effectiveness, but their skill in transmutation will only be around 60%. Their exact opposite category, conjuration, will max out at 40%. This pattern applies to all 6 categories, with a minor exception for specialists. Specialization is completely unusable to any category other than itself, although it is still able to use the other 5 at the appropriate rates. Specialists don't really fit into any other category, thus the name, and are exceedingly rare. What I just described barely scratches the surface of Nen. There are a million different techniques and ways to apply it that I simply do not have the time to explain, and also, I don't remember the names for them. I have extensively studied this series, and I don't know, what's Gyo? Because of this, Nen is simultaneously incredibly overbearing, but also incredibly fun. It's probably my favorite magic system in any story ever, due to just how well thought out it is and how much it allows for creativity. You may wonder why Togashi didn't introduce this system until the third arc of the series, and the answer to that would be that he didn't think of it until the third arc of the series. This last-minute addition is undoubtedly for the better as it forms the backbone of the rest of the show, but it does lead to some messy retcons. None of them will majorly affect your enjoyment of the story, but they definitely exist. The first retcon to pop up actually occurs now. To explain why no Nen users have been seen in the series so far, Togashi retcons the Hunter Association into being the only group with knowledge of it. New hunters are then mentored in the art by experienced hunters. The problem is that there are literally non-hunter Nen users in this arc. Also, Nen is supposed to be a secret to the world at large, but you need to be able to use it to compete above the 200th floor in Heaven's Arena, and those matches are televised. Even if Aura is technically invisible to non-users' eyes, does nobody wonder how these people manage to do this kind of shit? Also, every single member of the Zoldyck family besides Killua is a Nen user, and he is still somehow completely unaware of its existence, including his younger sibling Kaluto, who is, like I said, younger than him, and learns Nen younger than him.
Sometimes I'll start a
Story.
and I don't even know where it's going. I just hope I find it along the way.
Quick note here, Hisoka claims later in this arc that each category of Nen has a typical set of personality traits that go along with it. Although he himself claims that this isn't perfectly or even mostly accurate, most of the major characters from each type throughout the series fit their type description pretty well. If you take the compatibility levels between types to also apply to the people, it actually works out pretty well. Gon gets along incredibly well with Killua and Leorio, who are both directly next to him on the Nen wheel. Now think about Kurapika and Leorio's constant bickering, and then remember that they're on the exact opposite positions. These little relationship tests work out pretty well amongst most of the cast, and I'm not sure if it's intentional. If it is, gold star, Togashi? Getting back to the actual story, Gon and Killua quickly advance up to the 200th floor, making quite a name for themselves until they're met by Hisoka. Hisoka unleashes his Ren in order to block them from entering the 201st floor. Every time they try to pass him in the hallway, they are completely overtaken by the sheer power of his aura, meaning they have to learn the art in order to continue towards their goal. I want to dig into Hisoka's motivation here for just a second. You may think this action doesn't really make sense due to his desire to fight Gon, but he's really just doing it as a favor, honestly. Gon would almost certainly die if he fought above the 200th floor without Nen, so this is Hisoka's way of making sure that Gon lives to fulfill his potential, which is something we'll see occur many other times in the series. Hey, maybe he's not such a bad guy after all. Anyway, their education ends up coming from a new character named Wing. Wing and his student Zushi are the main supporting characters you'll see in this arc. Wing himself is actually a hunter with a very solid understanding of Nen. He ends up taking on Gon and Killua as students in addition to Zushi after witnessing their massive levels of potential. I'm pretty lukewarm on Wing as a character. There's nothing really wrong with him per se, but there's also nothing very special about him. He's an incredibly standard mentor character, which wouldn't necessarily be that much of a problem, but there are many other characters of his archetype in this series, all of whom are much more interesting and fun than he is. I do, however, like Zushi. He's not a very complicated character, essentially just being a hardworking kid, but he represents the idea that you shouldn't give up just because others around you have more natural talent than you. Hard work will pay off eventually, even if it takes longer. He's basically a Diet Rock Lee, now that I think about it. I would probably get tired of him if he stuck around for a long time, but he never appears again after this arc, making him a nice little breath of fresh air. I actually do hope we get to see him again someday. It'd be nice to get a progress check on his growth, and who knows, maybe he could even become a part of the story. Anyway, Gon and Killua quickly learn the basics of Nen as well as their specific affinities, Enhancer and Transmuter respectively, and are able to bypass Hisoka. This opens up the last 51 floors to them, where the second act of this arc is spent divided between training sequences and Nen-based battles. I do not like this section very much, and it's mostly because of what I like to call the Abject Failure Trio. These guys act as the supporting villains of this arc, and none of them are exactly what I would call interesting in either personality or power. I honestly could not tell you a single one of their names, and I absolutely refuse to look them up. Personality-wise, they are just as generic. They're all just dickheads for seemingly no reason. They wouldn't even be so bad if they would just stop having screen time, but no, these guys were apparently very important to Togashi's vision. The one cool thing about them is that they use Nen to remedy their physical disabilities, such as providing this guy who is blind with an alternative to sight. This is a pretty clever way to demonstrate the versatility of Nen without having to actually explain it, which there's a lot of explaining already, so I'll take what I can get. Their fights also aren't terrible, but they're far from the series' finest. Across the three of them, they get 4 fights, although it's really the 2 of them because this guy just does not participate. He actually kidnaps Zushi for a little bit now that I think about it, but this plot point matters so little that Killua literally solves it in 5 minutes without Gon ever finding out. Anyway, the first of these fights is definitely my favorite. It's the only one of them that occurs prior to Gon and Killua's second training session, which sees them massively increase in power. As a result of this, the 3 other abject failure fights end up being pretty one-sided affairs, while the first is a serious challenge for Gon. The near suicidal solution he finds to be able to dodge the tops, shutting off all of his aura in order to focus on his senses, is perfectly in character for Gon as well. My only real problem with it mostly comes from the anime, where it's just stretched out to be a little bit too long, whereas in the manga it goes by pretty quickly, but otherwise it's a pretty decent fight. Regardless of whether or not I like it though, it's not going to save the middle portion of the arc. What does save it though, is Hisoka and Castro's fight. Castro's existence as a character is kind of pathetic. He literally only exists to demonstrate the consequences of negligent training in Nen. His match with Hisoka gets pretty hyped up beforehand, as they've supposedly fought before, with the last one being a draw. This creates a fair level of intrigue about Castro's abilities. If he can stand toe-to-toe with the most powerful character in the series up to this point, he must be insanely powerful. And he certainly is, or at least he seems that way. Castro dominates the majority of the fight with his doppelganger ability until the very last minute, when Hisoka reveals that he's had him in the palm of his hand the entire time. The fight is a great display of tactics as well as the consequences of a poorly crafted ability. The main reason Castro failed was because his ability made use of conjuration and manipulation, neither of which were his natural affinity, which was actually enhancement. The audience is even introduced to a member of the Phantom Troop afterwards who reveals that Hisoka himself is a member. It's undoubtedly the best part of the second act. Once you get through a few more fights with the abject failure trio, you arrive at the real meat and potatoes of the arc, Hisoka's fight with Gon. The animation, direction, sound design, and choreography are all top-notch, and there isn't a dull moment. It's also supremely satisfying to see Gon hold his own against the clown that previously humiliated him so badly. This basically brings an end to this entire plotline, which I originally thought was strange, especially after setting them up for a meeting in Yorknew. On review though, I'm really glad Togashi resolved this conflict now, as it would have completely bogged down the next arc. What makes the whole fight even better is that Gon doesn't actually win. Hisoka's level of power is still far beyond him, but he is able to regain his pride by proving to himself that he can match Hisoka someday if he works hard enough. This provides a satisfying conclusion to this rivalry without removing all of Gon's need to keep growing. And trust me, the next arcs will prove just how much room for improvement he still has. If you've noticed that I haven't said much about this fight, it's for 2 reasons. One is that I looked at the page count on my script and decided to speed things up, and the other is that you should just go watch this fight as unspoiled as possible. It's really, really good. I guess maybe I shouldn't have made most of the intro to this section clips from this fight if I wanted that to happen, but like, I would be remiss if I didn't at least address this occurrence once though.
Don't look at me like that. It's really turning me on.
Why don't you take a seat right over there? What was on the agenda tonight?
I was just gonna, well,
That's a little creepy, I gotta tell you, Steve.
The arc ends with Gon bringing Killua to his home for a visit. While there, they find a message that Gon's dad left behind that could only be listened to once he had earned his hunter's license. The message tells of a video game called Greed Island, which Gon and Killua make it their goal to buy. The only place that it's on sale, however, is the Yorknew auction, which starts on September 1st. One of my favorite scenes in the arc occurs right at the end, when Gon and Killua are relaxing underneath the stars. Killua laments that he's the only one among their friends who doesn't have a serious purpose in life. This is a pretty clear consequence of his parents' excessive control over his childhood. According to Dr. Sabrina Romanoff, children tend to have difficulty making decisions or speaking for themselves when they're too sheltered, which is a problem that Killua is obviously suffering from. He makes an interesting decision though, which is to make Gon's goals his own. This is the beginning of a codependent aspect of their friendship, which will develop more and more as the next arcs unfold, so keep it in mind. Heaven's Arena is definitely not my favorite part of Hunter x Hunter, but it has its fair share of shining moments, and it doesn't stretch out for long enough to really get on your nerves. I would have preferred if it was more directly focused on Gon's rivalry with Hisoka, but it's okay as it stands. It's nowhere near the level of quality that people advertise when they talk about Hunter x Hunter, though. If you've been waiting to see where that reputation really comes from, then fear not, your wait is at its end.
What are y'all doing?